This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Ethan. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm not bad.
Good for you. What do we got going today?
Well, I do have a piece of news we can cover real quick to kind of start us off.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, so let's see. Let me find it.
While you're doing that, we're going to talk about being prepared and preparing and what that actually means while you're finding your little story and bringing that up. But yeah, this is part 6 or 7 of getting your school safe, is being prepared and how do you prepare and what are you preparing for? So that's what we're going to discuss. So what do you got for me?
So this was published almost a week ago, so November 8th. There was a 13-year-old who went into a school in Kenosha, and he went in there with what was believed to be a rifle and at least one big black duffel bag.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying to find the video again, but I can't find it. But basically he enters the school not from the front, but he enters from a side door. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of an important thing to remember. And then basically the staff, obviously see him walk in with this pretty suspicious looking stuff. So They basically confront him and hey man, what are you doing? And then he instantly gets pretty nervous and then runs back out. And then, authorities were obviously called and then they found him. And then he was actually charged a misdemeanor, but it was terroristic threats or something like that. So I guess terroristic threats could either be a misdemeanor or a felony. Do you think in this case that it was a misdemeanor or a felony? What do you think the probability of that is?
The information that I think you left out there is when they did
not intentionally.
Yeah, but when you do the full investigation, it's not what you first observe. It's what the whole picture presents to you. And the investigation showed what?
That the rifle was just a airsoft gun.
And all of the weapons that they found at the house were either replica or airsoft or they were non-functioning firearms.
Yeah, so then the other key thing I was going to say here is somewhere down in this article, they obviously interviewed they're talking to the mom, and she said, he doesn't have any access to firearms. Mm-hmm. And I instantly, as I read that, I go, yet.
Yeah.
It's you've talked about the brick thing, right? And it's he's just missing that one brick. That's the only thing that's going to completely change this around.
Yeah. So we take that first scenario of what we know. Obviously, it's a news article, but here's a kid carrying a duffel bag. I mean, quintessential. This is the guy that we're looking for. He's carrying a duffel bag. He's got a backpack.
He's wearing all black.
He's wearing all black. He's essentially the tactical image that we see stereotypical of these active shooters, right? Walks into a school. And we'll talk about another discussion that you shared with me yesterday, but walks into a school, makes it into a school, and brandishes a weapon, what is perceived to be a rifle. And as you read the article, it also says they're crediting this as a win, which it was, right? And saying how important it was to receive the tips and the information about what was going on very quickly. Again, absolutely correct. What they did in response to it was textbook. Confront the kid and report what they found and report to the police what happened after being confronted. Now, I know what you're going to say. So say
Do
it.
you? Okay, maybe. There was a video, and I'll have to, maybe I can add it in or something. But basically, it shows like a staff walking right up to this kid,
Mm-hmm. I know.
and you can't tell that he's got a fake gun. Like they just walk right up to him. So I mean, a part of me is like, wow, like that's bold.
Right?
Like I think a lot of people would look at that and go, "Oh shoot," and they'd run. But it shows this staff employee just walk right up to this person. It's like, wow, that's
And I
both.
haven't seen the video, so I'm going to make the assumption that they didn't realize he had a weapon
Yeah,
when
it's
he did
probably
it,
true.
or they were unfamiliar with what he was doing, or what have you, and they confronted him. We talk about confronting people who don't belong on your campus.
Mm,
And this goes back to when we talk about wins. Are we happy that everyone survived that event? Yes. Are we happy that they confronted him? Yes. Are we happy that when he ran away, because he almost immediately
yeah,
ran away, are we happy that they immediately or very quickly reported to law enforcement? Yes. Are we happy that they were able to identify him, do an investigation and charge? Yes, absolutely. Now, and we're going to look at that as a success. If you look at the article, we're looking at that as a win. Now, let's change one fact here. What is the fact that I'm going to change?
I'm trying to say this correctly. It was a test.
No,
Did I jump
not
ahead?
yet. Yeah, not yet.
All
Not yet. Right.
right, I'll keep that over in
So
my back pocket.
the fact that I'm going to change here is we were lucky that it was a fake weapon.
Mm,
If we had that everything identical except for the fact that we change it that he actually had a working firearm, this is a whole different scenario. So this is where you have to look at the win, accept the win. Don't get me wrong, accept the win. This was a good outcome. But was it a good outcome because we did it correctly or because we were lucky? I'll ask you that
I'm
question.
I'm gonna vote the latter.
The latter, right? Because he was able to walk during school hours, a 13-year-old kid into a elementary school, clearly not of the elementary age, right? He's in
Mm,
middle school at a minimum, right?
yeah,
Walks in carrying a duffel bag, a backpack, and at some point he produces a replica weapon. He's wandering the halls. We have him on video. They had cameras. Cameras didn't prevent anything from happening, but we have him on video brandishing the replica firearm. And we confront them. We don't know why they confronted him, other than he was suspicious. And I love because I read the article, and the article said allegedly suspicious. It's not. There's no allegedly about it.
yeah.
Here's a kid
Wicked
who does not
suspicious.
belong in your school. He's dressed in an inappropriate manner for what he was doing. His actions were inappropriate, totally suspicious. I don't know why we have to put allegedly in front of everything. He gets into the school, is confronted. He gets scared and leaves. When we look at that, and you add that now there's an actual firearm, if you put a firearm, a working, operable firearm in that kid's hands, what do you got? Whole different change, right?
Yeah,
Right.
whole different scenario.
So in the article, he said all he was trying to do was scare the kids.
Yeah, I don't believe it.
What do you think he was doing?
I think he was probing.
Dry run, right?
He's that's like the second to last stage on your pathway to violence.
Yep, absolutely right. This is what we would call probing as opposed to breaching. We also know that there was information received that he had been researching other active shooters, right? So this isn't just
Mm.
a Halloween prank. I'm going to go and scare a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
He's researching previous events. When you walk into a school, and you got to take it from the mind of a 13-year-old, and we know adolescents, teenagers, don't always think everything through. I will bet you, if we really knew the truth, and hopefully we will at some point, that he was doing a dry run and he 100% thought, I'm not doing anything wrong because the weapons that I have can't do any harm,
Hmm.
right? They're fake weapons, they're toys.
They're fake, so this doesn't count.
This doesn't count,
Yeah.
right? And I'll just tell them I'm trying to scare them and they're going to leave me alone. Well, they kind of did, unless they're still continuing something that I'm not aware of, which is, I hope it's actually occurring. But when we look at the lengths that this kid went to pull off this, I'm using air quotes, prank to scare kids, this is more than just a 13-year-old kid screwing around. This puts him, in my
Yeah.
mind, very high on, and if we look at that whole pathway to violence and where this is one step before the actual attack begins. A kid, I hope he gets the attention he needs, however that plays out, whether it's criminal in nature and or mental health support, guidance, or what have you. This is a kid that needs some intensive attention. Talked just a little bit ago about this other discussion that you shared with me, and I don't even know where you got all these texts and responses from, but there
Oh,
was,
oh, I know what you're talking about now. I was like, what
yep,
is he talking? Oh, this is locally to me. This is
yeah,
in New Hampshire.
and so there's was a kid that made a threat against the school, and I don't care to go
So
into
what?
the.
It wasn't a kid. It was a grown man. It was
Oh, okay.
full adult, like 18.
What's that?
Was it an 18-year-old? I mean,
Yeah,
I guess a lot of people are probably kids to you, but
well, you're a kid to me. My kids are your age.
like, so okay, it's someone that doesn't go to the school, obviously,
Yeah.
and
But 19 years old is a man child, right?
sure,
They made a threat to a school, and that's not really the issue here. The issue is the consternation and the disgust that the participants in your little chat group there had with, why aren't the police more proactive?
yeah, that was kind of basically the consensus is that. So what all those comments stem from was the police had released obviously some announcement like, hey, we've investigated this and he's not a threat to the community. Basically,
Right.
it's like, how? Wait,
Yeah. Well, they want to say, everyone wants to say, well, wait a second, that's your job. He's made a threat. Now go lock him away for the next 15 years. Here's the problem. This is my belief that this has happened many times before, where there is a disconnect between law enforcement and their investigation and what the school believes they should do. And when a school does a threat assessment, a threat investigation and a threat assessment are two different things.
yes,
And I want to make sure that we're clear on this. This also ties in with, not all law enforcement people have the same level of expertise. So you can't just paint law enforcement with a broad brush and say, why didn't they do this? Well, because not every law enforcement officer deals with threats any more than the general public.
hmm.
Right? And this type of threat, when somebody's doing a threat towards a school or towards an organization, there are several entities that specifically deal with threats on a daily basis. Secret Service, FBI,
Mm.
many larger agencies have units that do threat assessments. I was in charge of one of those units. when I was a lieutenant at the sheriff's department. But what law enforcement is trying to do is meet a criminal threshold. You can have somebody who poses a threat, but is missing one or two elements of a criminal act. And if the law enforcement officer, investigator, who is investigating a threat is not really familiar with that process, then they look at it and say, well, I have no crime here. There's nothing else I can do. I can't arrest them. And that's their solution, is to arrest somebody. That's the power they have. They can tell, don't do this. If you do
Yeah.
this and this, you're going to be committing a crime, but I don't see a crime yet. Right?
Right.
The disconnect is when we don't communicate the lack of criminal elements with the level of threat, and we don't communicate the level of threat to the entity that's being threatened. If you don't understand threat assessments and threat management, then you do what you think you're supposed to do. Is there a crime? Yes or no? If there is, arrest. If there's not, then send them on their merry way. I've got other crimes to address,
Yeah,
other
probably.
issues to address, right?
Yeah. Let me add some more context here. So I think he has to at least be over 18, at least, because I think he was previously at that same. So this is a private school. He was previously like a sub math teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and then he's no longer a math teacher there anymore. They don't know. I didn't get that information of why he's not there anymore. There was somewhere they found he made some comment of like, I'm the person that you do drills for, that you do active shooters for. I'm the type of person that you do
Mm-hmm.
drills for. So that right there, it's like, okay. And then the other kind of interesting piece here is
But that's
that
not a threat, though, right?
no, it's not a threat. It's just like, okay, that's a incredibly wild statement. It's a brick. So then there's the part of like, okay, he's not a student. Like the school can't do an internal assessment on it. It's not like a student made that thing and like the school can like keep tabs on him or whatever you want to call it. The other kind of point I want to make here, and I want to get your take on it. So it's a private school,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the funding comes from student enrollment
Mm-hmm.
at a high level,
Tuition. Mm-hmm.
tuition. So they released something saying, so in order to kind of mitigate any attack or anything like that, I guess they basically made a GoFundMe to hire a security guard
Sure.
for the school
Mm-hmm.
because they don't have one.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on that? I'll just leave it like that.
Yeah. So they're taking a step in the right direction. Is it sufficient? No. This will lead us into our primary topic is what they're doing is hiring somebody to defer their responsibility to prepare for this and prevent this type of event from happening. Now, I don't know anything about the school, but they received this, they're going to call it a threat. And that in and of itself is not a threat. That was a statement. Inappropriate statement, concerning statement, yes. Threat, no. But does it warrant us looking deeper into them? Yes. Should the school be looking into that person? Yes. Do they have the right to do it? Yes. Right? Should law enforcement be looking at that person? Yes. Should they be doing an assessment? Yes. And they should be talking to each other. What other behaviors are we seeing? And we can do a lot of research, a lot of assessing with open source stuff, right?
That's true.
Without going into the actual personal environment of this person. We can do a lot of stuff and we can figure out what's going, get a pretty good picture. And then we can start looking at legal remedies. If it rises to that point, maybe a restraining order is
Okay.
due. Maybe, probably not in this case, but maybe there's some sort of probation or something that would allow us maybe violate the terms and conditions of a release from another event. maybe we could find other events that have occurred that would elevate this a little bit and start putting those bricks into that wall that says, oh, maybe it is a threat. Maybe this is, but maybe still not reach the criminal threshold. Criminal thresholds are pretty straightforward. It's like I've said before, and we're building this wall. When we start looking at these steps, hiring a security guard, okay, maybe that's a good first step. But as soon as you think about that, you need to pivot and start preparing and taking steps to prevent that from occurring. If you believe that law enforcement can protect you from every threat, you need to reassess your position.
That was like the nicest way to say that.
Right? You get back to some of the things that I've said from the very beginning of this podcast. You can expect somebody else to take care of you. You can expect somebody else to protect you. They may have a legal mandate to do such. The issue comes in is they can't be everywhere all the time. And especially in our current environment with law enforcement, where they're underfunded, there's this political back and forth as to whether or not they're effective or how effective they are and so forth. I don't want to get into that today or ever, really, because that's a silly argument to get into. The fact of the matter is regardless of their responsibility or legal mandate, they can't be everywhere at all times. And who ultimately is responsible for your safety? You are. Who is ultimately responsible for the safety of the children in schools? The
You are.
schools.
Yep.
You are. You're responsible for the safety of your child. You're responsible for making sure that the school that you're paying for, whether it's through tax dollars and or tuition, is set to keep your kids safe. It doesn't matter that it's a private school or a public school. The only distinction here is where do they get their funding from?
Right.
Kids that go to private school need to be kept safe, just like the kids that go to public schools. There's no difference. So here's where we got to go. We've talked about Left of Bang many, many times, and I don't know when the release date of this is, but in early December, we're going to, I think I mentioned this on the last one, we're going to have a guest on our show, Patrick Van Horn, who is the author of one of the authors of Left of Bang. We're going to talk about this specific topic is moving our response. We are in a society where we're talking about response to. And when we talk about the primary topic of today is being prepared. It's being prepared to respond confidently to whatever you're faced with. The issue is we live in a reactive and response society. We wait till something happens and then we take action. In this case, we waited till an ex-employee makes what they perceive as a threat, and now they're going to hire a security guard. Now it becomes a problem for them.
Yeah.
So let's move our response further left of the need, bang, and let's start trying to take steps where we can prevent that from occurring. If we can't prevent it, because nothing's 100%, if we can't prevent it, how do you want me to respond to it? Right? Now we go back to the first article we talked about, and now we're talking about, okay, we had a kid who, according to Kelly, is one step away from attacking that school. Our response to that act, luckily, was correct. Change one factor in there, and we have different results here. So are they going to take that success and say, we were lucky that he didn't really have an operable firearm? And are we going to take steps to prevent him from ever entering this building? Are we going to then take steps that if he does circumvent our prevention, our security, our secured perimeter, our access controls, our visitor controls, they circumvent that somehow, how do you want us to respond to that? And so that's what we're really trying to do, is move that response. We want to stay, if we could, live our lives in the prevention and mitigation space. We could prevent everything from happening. If we can't prevent it, we can mitigate its impacts on us. There's a very thin line between prevention and mitigation. That thin line is preparing for. That's where we have to shift. We have to be prepared to prevent. We have to be prepared to mitigate. We have to be prepared to respond to, and we have to be prepared to recover. They're all interconnected. If we stop waiting to respond to something and we start moving left of bang to prevent something from occurring, we're all going to be so much better off, much quicker.
Way better off.
Way better off. What I'm saying is almost every state, I'm saying almost, I believe it is every state, but I'm not 100% on that, has a mandate to create what we call at Crisis Go emergency operations plans for all hazards. Some people call them emergency response plans, a plan to respond to an emergency. If we want to be prepared and we want to live in that prevention mitigation space, then we have to shift what that plan looks like. And we have to create plans that shift to the left. And what I mean by that, if I have the same circumstances that we talked about in that first article, 13-year-old boy enters school with what were thought to be weapons, what is my response to that? How do I respond to that? How do I operationalize my response plan earlier? And we've talked about this, and I'm not going to just beat this one to death, but if they thought that kid was just suspicious, and we turned out and we find out that he has replica firearms or firearms, actual firearms, what is the response to that? Hey, I'm confronting a kid who I believe is here to do us harm. Press the button. Get me some help. Get all of my kids, all of my staff into an emergency protective action, standard response protocol, lockdown, secure. I need to investigate what's going on. Operationalize your active shooter plan before they start shooting, is my point here.
Yeah.
But right now, it's wait till the shots are fired and hit the button.
It's like waiting for the confirmation. I think there's some thing here of like, I don't want to be that person that presses the button if it's not what it is. It's like, maybe, what if they had done all that and it was just a fake gun? Are you in the wrong? No, not at all. Like, you're doing everything right. Like, no one's going to blame you. No one's going to say, all right, you shouldn't have hit that button. Like,
that's right. That's exactly right.
Like, no, hit it.
Hit it. And I totally understand the culture though, right?
Yeah.
If we have to confirm, absolutely 100% confirm that this is a dangerous action, we're always playing behind the response curve, right?
Yep.
And this is where, when we start talking about problem solving, we start talking about emergency management, we start talking about operationalizing your plans. And we see it all of the time, having all the information versus enough information. If we go way back in the blogs and we start talking about the blogs and podcasts, we start talking about asking yourself, what's the worst that could happen? If I go up and I'm wrong, what's the worst that could happen?
Delay education time for a few minutes.
We have to adjust our schedule. We're going to have to call the cops and say, you can shut down. I was wrong. This is what it is. And we call it a practice drill.
If I'm a law enforcement person burning rubber down the road towards what I assume is an active shooter, but then they call me and say, hey, actually, it's not what we think it is. It's much less.
We
We don't
still
need you
need you to
here. Like,
come, but it's not. So if you take that scenario and you say, look at, I have this strange kid, he's dressed tactically, we're looking at everything, even if I don't see
mm,
a firearm, there is something that in their mind, and you know the culture in our schools, it takes a lot for somebody to say, huh, that kid, that person doesn't belong here. I need to confront them.
mm,
If we're going to use today's culture, I hope it shifts and it becomes more of a regular thing to confront people who don't belong on your campus. But if we're going to take the threshold that it is now, something's not right here. Something's going on. I need to confront this guy. Maybe we should think about some sort of protective action, because what's the worst that could happen? I'm wrong. I'm okay with being wrong in that situation. Because
yeah,
if I don't do it, if I don't confront them, or I confront them and they actually have weapons or they have operable weapons, what's the worst that could happen, right? And you can let your imagination go. But the fact of the matter is if you are confronting somebody because you think your kids are in danger, press the button. Respond to your emergency before it's an emergency.
it's like, what if we shifted from confronting in that situation where a kid's dressed in all black, he's carrying duffel bags. Like, what if we shift it to, hey, this kid is always alone. I can see he doesn't have a lot of friends. He's sitting at the cafeteria alone. Let's talk to him. Like let's get like really far on the left side and be like,
Sure, sure. But let's take it.
what if we got to that point?
Yeah. Well, if we could, that's the, starting when they're in kindergarten, right? And making kids feel part of the community, right? And addressing the isolation, addressing those issues early and often, and keeping that going takes a lot of effort, right? And we
Mm,
we almost never know what the outcome's going to be at the end if we don't do it, or if we
right.
do it. It could be all for naught, right? But let's take one step back from that. Let's change that scenario, that very scenario, just a little bit. You have a fence around your school, and you see dude dressed in tactical gear, carrying a duffel bag and a backpack, climbing over your back fence, walking through the play yard towards your school. That's your scenario. What are your actions? That is a classic scenario of a secure. You have an unknown person dressed in tactical gear walking towards your school. You have a very short period of time to take action. Hit the secure button, secure the perimeter, keep that threat outside. Now you take that same person and he's walking your hallway. That's a classic lockdown situation. Unknown person carrying stuff that is odd, dressed in an odd fashion in your school where they don't belong. That is a classic lockdown situation. Did that occur here? We don't know that they have a weapon or not. We don't care that they have a weapon. You have enough information to say that person does not belong here. He's dressed odd. He's acting odd. He's carrying odd stuff. It's time to start hitting buttons. Put
Yep.
your emergency, your active shooter plan into operation before it becomes a shooting. Same when you receive a high level threat. I get it. I know that there's many threats that are coming over the internet that are hoax threats.
Mm,
Press the button. What does it hurt? Let's keep them safe. Let's call in the cops. Hey, I got this. We received this threat. Oh, you're receiving lots of them? Oh, You think they're hoaxes? Okay. Now we can start backing up. If you make that call and say, hey, we just received this threat, we have our school in lockdown right now, and they say, okay, we're en route. We haven't heard anything. We don't know what's going on. Let's get there. Let's get some forces there to protect you. Let's see what's going on. That's good, right? And there's a difference between a hoax threat and a swatting call. Swatting call is saying, we're experiencing shots fired right now. We have multiple kids down. That's a swatting call. Law enforcement gets there and they see nothing. They didn't receive a call from the schools. Drive up and everything looks normal. While en route, they can have dispatchers call. Hey, what's going on at your school? We have a report of shots fired. We don't have anything going. Can you do me a favor? Put everyone on lockdown. We have law enforcement coming and we just need to make sure. And that takes 15, 20 minutes. Lockdown drill. Everyone's communicating. We're not seeing anything. Let's walk the halls real quick. But let's get everyone into this position. And, luckily from a crisis goes perspective, we can create that communications very quickly. Even if law enforcement is the first receiver of that information. So we can push out notifications from law enforcement back to the schools. And they can say, hey, put your school in lockdown. We're receiving reports of shots fired. Now you've got everyone moving into a protective action, a lockdown, and you're buying time. You're not seeing anything. You're not hearing anything. Now you have time to say, okay, we're in lockdown, but we have nothing. We have no indicators that anything is happening. When we have conflict between schools and law enforcement, when there's this swatting call or these false threat calls, it's because the two aren't communicating. The school might not know about it. So who's responsible for that? Law enforcement.
Yep.
Right? I will tell you, in my experience, and this just kills me from the law enforcement perspective. Anytime you have any significant issue anywhere, a school, a neighborhood, whatever. And in fact, this is common practice. Officer so and so respond to Main Street, report of shots fired. The first question out of that officer's mouth after he says 10-4, how many reports do you have? It's a different type of response that officer is going to do if they say one or several, right?
Okay.
Rarely will you get shots fired in a place where shots aren't expected. Are you going to get one phone call?
No, you're going to get a bunch.
You're going to get multiple, right?
Yeah.
And there's all of these things that we have to take. Is one call enough to respond? Yes. But if you start receiving multiple calls, that increases the urgency because now you're getting validation. If you're in a school full of 2,000 kids with cell phones, if you don't get 100 911 calls, I'd be shocked. If you have that same and you have Crisis Go or any other solution, I'd be shocked if you didn't have 100 panic buttons.
Yeah, all the alerts going off.
If you get 0 from that location, something's going on. Have them respond. Let's work on it and figure that out. Just to sort of wrap this up, when we start looking at being prepared, it's not only being prepared to respond to an actual event, but you have to be, but it's being prepared, respond to those incidents before they become an emergency, before they negatively impact your school, your community, before that. And so we have to start training our people, as evident by this article that we talked about at the beginning. We have to train them to see so that they can recognize these kids that are on this pathway to violence and those precursors to that attack and understand that. And why I say that, and specifically about the pathway to violence, is there is a pathway to every emergency. There's a pathway to fire. There is a pathway to weather. There is a pathway to earthquakes. Very short pathway on earthquakes, like 15 seconds. But they're getting to a point where they can predict earthquakes
Yeah,
by identifying these precursor events. And so even earthquakes, hurricanes, acts of violence, all of these things have a pathway. And if we start looking at each of those pathways to each of our hazard categories, then we can start stepping back and recognizing, ooh, having the gasoline next to the furnace is not a good place for it. Right? Let's remove the gasoline can from the furnace. We can start looking at what are those steps that we can take before it impacts us. And that actually is the prevention and mitigation phase. Stay there and as much as you can, but be prepared to respond if all of your efforts fail.
Life is a little bit easier in the prevention stage.
It goes back. There was this old commercial. I'm sure it was when I was a kid. Okay. It was about changing your oil in your car. It was an oil service like Jiffy Lube or Econolube or something like that, right?
Sure.
It was either, in fact, I think it was a Valvoline commercial, but I'm not 100% on that. But it says, pay me now or pay me later.
Yeah.
Right? So here is the same. There's still a lot of effort that's needed. You're never going to get away from putting in the effort, ever, ever, ever. I'm going to make that perfectly clear. You have to put in the effort. Once you put in that effort, things become much easier. There's a lot of effort that needs to be put in on the front end of it. But once you create this sustainable, almost this flywheel effect, you get that momentum going, it's hard to stop. And it becomes much easier and efficient and effective. Everything starts moving like it's supposed to when you put in the effort to get that sort of safety culture moving, that machine that everyone is so reluctant to get involved with. It just works so much better for people.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.